I am Caitlin, 26 years old. 2 weeks ago, I called my parents after my car flew off a cliff, expecting them to panic, to scream, to send help. But they didn't ask if I was hurt. My mother just asked me one question that froze my blood colder than the snow outside. You are still alive. And the terrifying part. She sounded disappointed. Let me take you back to the moment my life ended and restarted. I was driving down the I-90 past midnight freezing rain. To calm my nerves, I was playing an old voicemail from my mother on the car stereo. Her voice was filling the cabin. Remember, Caitlin, no matter if the whole world turns its back on you, Mom is your safe space. That was the last thing I heard before I hit the brakes for the hairpin turn. The pedal didn't just feel soft, it sank straight to the floor. Nothing. Zero resistance. I was doing 50 miles per hour toward a guardrail. I pumped the brakes once, twice, panic rising in my throat. I screamed, yanked the wheel, and the world flipped upside down. Metal screaming against rock, glass shattering. Then, silence. My car was hanging off the edge of the ravine, swaying in the wind. Smell of gasoline, taste of blood. My phone was the only light in the dark. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unlock it. I dialed the only person I trusted. Mom. She answered on the second ring. Mom. I wheezed. Mom, I crashed. The brakes. I'm over the edge. I waited for the scream. I waited for the comfort. But there was only a long, heavy silence. Then her voice came through, not scared but annoyed. Cold. Caitlin. How are you even calling right now? Before I could answer, the line went dead. She hung up. Before I tell you what the police found in my car engine and the terrifying secret my parents were hiding, hit that like button and subscribe, but only if you have the guts to hear the truth. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? And do you trust your family with your life? Because after this story, you might not. The sterile, rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitor was the first thing that pulled me out of the darkness. My body felt heavy, encased in a dull, throbbing ache that radiated from my ribs down to my fractured ankle. I blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights of St. Jude Hospital, my throat dry as sandpaper. The room was cold, smelling of antiseptic and latex. I tried to turn my head, expecting to see the people who had raised me, perhaps weeping in the corner, regretting their coldness on the phone. But the two chairs near the window were empty of parents. Instead, a figure stirred in the uncomfortable vinyl recliner next to my bed. It was Kevin, my best friend from college, and a brilliant IT specialist, his glasses askew, and a half-eaten bagel on his lap. He looked like he hadn't slept in 48 hours. Seeing him there, keeping a vigil that should have belonged to my family, sent a fresh wave of grief through my chest that had nothing to do with my physical injuries. You're awake, Kevin whispered, straightening up immediately and pouring me a cup of water with shaking hands. Don't try to move too much. The doctors said you're lucky to be in one piece. Before I could ask where they were, though, deep down I knew the door clicked open. A woman I didn't recognize stepped in. She wasn't a doctor. She wore a sharp charcoal blazer, holding a thick leather briefcase, her expression professional, but softened by a look of intense pity. Caitlin, I'm Sarah Vance. She introduced herself, placing a business card on the bedside table. I'm an attorney specializing in insurance fraud and bad faith litigation. Kevin called me yesterday when certain irregularities came to light. I looked at Kevin, confused. He just nodded grimly. You need to hear this, Kate. Sarah didn't waste time with pleasantries. She pulled a document from her briefcase and laid it gently over the hospital blanket covering my legs. It was a copy of a life insurance policy. 3 months ago, a policy was taken out in your name with Protector Life Insurance. The coverage is for $500,000. It includes a double indemnity clause for accidental death, meaning if you died in a car crash, the payout jumps to $1 million. My breath hitched. I never bought this. I can barely afford my student loans and my rent. Look at the signature. Sarah pointed to the bottom of the page. I squinted. The ink looked like mine. The loop of the C, the sharp cross of the T. Then the memory hit me like a physical blow. 3 months ago, Carl had come to my apartment acting flustered, claiming he needed me to co-sign some paperwork for a family trust to protect the house. He had been so urgent, so aggressive, shuffling the papers so fast I barely read the headers. I had signed because I trusted him. I had signed my own death warrant. It gets worse, Sarah said, her voice dropping an octave. She pulled out a second file much thicker than the first. I ran a full asset check on Brenda and Carl. Caitlin, your parents aren't just struggling, they are drowning. She opened the file, revealing a chaotic web of red ink. Carl's venture capital investments in those tech startups last year, they were scams. He lost everything. To cover it, he borrowed from private lenders, the kind that don't use banks and break legs when you miss a payment. Brenda took out a third mortgage on the house without telling the bank about the other liens. Sarah tapped a specific date highlighted in neon yellow on the spreadsheet. They have a balloon payment of $1.2 million due to a shadow lender in Chicago. If they don't pay, the house is seized, and given the nature of these lenders, they are likely facing physical threats. The deadline for that payment is exactly 12 days from today. The silence in the room was deafening. The beeping of the monitor seemed to speed up, matching the racing of my heart. The puzzle pieces slammed together with terrifying precision. The sudden interest in my car's maintenance, the weird phone calls asking about my driving schedule, and finally that disappointed voice on the phone asking if I was still alive. They didn't hate me. It wasn't about anger or disappointment in my career choices. It was simple, cold arithmetic. To the world, I was a 26-year-old graphic designer with a bright future. To Brenda and Carl, I was simply a liquid asset worth $1 million, the only thing valuable enough to clear their ledger before the loan sharks came collecting. They hadn't just abandoned me in that hospital room. They were likely terrified that I was breathing, because a living daughter meant a dead deadline. I stared at the ceiling, tears hot and angry tracking into my ears, realizing that the people who gave me life had tried to take it back for the price of a mortgage payment. The weight of Sarah's financial revelation was still crushing the air in the room when a heavy knock vibrated the doorframe, interrupting the silence. A man stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. He looked like he had been carved out of granite and left out in the rain too long. Graying stubble eyes that had seen too much, and a trench coat that smelled faintly of stale coffee and road salt. "Ms. Hall," he said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't smile. He flashed a badge that read, Traffic Homicide Unit. "I'm Detective Ford. I need to ask you some questions about the night of the incident, and I need you to listen very carefully to what I've found, because in my 20 years on the force, I've never seen an accident report like this." Kevin moved to stand between me and the detective, protective instinct flaring, but I reached out and touched his arm, shaking my head. "It's okay, Kev. Let him speak." Ford pulled a metal chair close to the bed, the legs scraping harshly against the linoleum. He didn't pull out a notebook. Instead, he placed a ruggedized tablet on the swinging table over my lap. "We recovered your vehicle from the ravine this morning. The crush damage was severe, but the undercarriage was accessible. I had my forensic mechanic look at the brake lines." He swiped the screen, revealing a high-resolution photo of a black rubber hose. It ended abruptly, the edge clean and bright silver. "Brake lines burst when they're old, Caitlin. They fray, they leak. They don't snap in a perfect 45-degree angle. That was done with heavy-duty wire shears." My stomach turned over, bile rising in my throat. Hearing it was one thing. Seeing the physical proof that someone had crawled under my car with a tool in their hand was another. "But that's not why I'm here." Ford continued, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made me shiver. "Proving who cut the line is hard without video. Proving who knew you were going to die. That's actually much easier if the suspects are arrogant." He tapped a map application on the tablet. It showed a satellite view of the I-90 pass marked with glowing red pins. I pulled the GPS data from the cell towers in the area. I also pulled security footage from every business within a 10-mile radius. Ford pointed to the first pin located at a lonely service station off the highway exit. Timestamp 9:58 p.m. This is a screenshot from the gas station security camera 2 miles north of the hairpin turn. I leaned in, my breath fogging slightly in the cold room. The grainy black and white image showed a sedan idling in the shadows of the air pump station, lights off. The license plate was obscured by mud, but I knew that dent in the rear bumper. I knew the silhouette of the driver. It was Carl's car. He was there, I whispered. He was watching. He was waiting, Ford corrected. Now look at the second pin. This is the 911 dispatch center logs. He pressed a play button on the screen. The audio crackled, static hissing before Carl's voice broke through. He sounded frantic, breathless, a performance worthy of an Academy Award. 911, there's been a crash. A car went over the rail at the switchback on I-90. It looks bad. Really bad, I think. I think they're dead. There's no movement. Send an ambulance. That call, Ford said, pausing for effect, was logged at exactly 10:15 p.m. I frowned, trying to piece together the timeline through the fog of my concussion. Okay, so he saw me go over and called. He didn't help, but he called. That's what I thought too, Ford said. Until we downloaded the data from your car's event data recorder, the black box under your driver's seat. It records speed, throttle position, and G-force impact. Ford swiped to the final graph. It was a jagged red line that spiked violently. Your car hit the guardrail, flipped, and got hung up on a rock shelf for several minutes before finally sliding down to the bottom of the ravine. The EDR recorded the final catastrophic impact, the one Carl claimed he saw at 10:25 p.m. The room spun. I looked from the graph to the detective, my mind refusing to accept the math. He called 911 10 minutes before your car actually hit the bottom. Ford said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He reported a fatal crash while you were likely still clinging to the cliffside. He didn't call because he saw the accident, Caitlin. He called because he was following a schedule. He assumed you were dead, and he wanted to establish the timeline for the insurance claim immediately. He was so eager to cash in that ticket, he outran the truth. The realization hit me harder than the airbag had. Carl and Brenda hadn't just set a trap. They had stood in the dark watching my headlights disappear, checking their watches, and deciding exactly when I had officially ceased to be their daughter and become their payday. They had reported my death while I was still fighting for my life. Kevin's apartment in the Logan Square district was supposed to be a fortress, a place where the jagged edges of the last 48 hours couldn't reach me. I sat on his worn velvet sofa, my leg propped up on 3 pillows, staring at the exposed brick wall while the city hummed indifferently outside. But while I had been physically escaping St. Jude Hospital, Brenda had been busy constructing a prison. I couldn't walk out of a prison built entirely of lies and digital sympathy. The first brick was thrown not through a window but into my professional inbox. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, lighting up with a notification from the Human Resources Department of the design firm, where I had spent 4 years building a flawless reputation. The subject line was Stark Urgent Employment Status Notification. I opened it, my thumb hovering over the screen, trembling slightly. The email was a masterpiece of corporate detachment. It stated that the company had received an anonymous external report concerning my conduct, specifically alleging habitual substance abuse and erratic behavior that poses a liability to the firm. Attached was a grainy photo from a college Halloween party 5 years ago, me holding a red Solo cup, looking disheveled and laughing too loudly. Out of context, it looked damning. The email concluded that effective immediately, I was placed on unpaid administrative leave, pending a full internal investigation. They suspended me. I whispered the words, tasting like ash. Kevin, she sent them a picture from my 21st birthday. She's trying to cut off my income. Kevin looked up from his laptop, his face pale in the glow of the screen. Caitlin, the job is the least of your problems right now. You need to see this. He turned the laptop toward me. It was open to Brenda's Facebook profile. The post had been up for 6 hours and already had over 400 reactions, mostly teary-eyed emojis and praying hands. The picture was a selfie of Brenda looking haggard and bravely tearful, clutching a rosary. I read the caption and my blood ran cold. My heart is shattering into a million pieces tonight. Please, prayer warriors, lift up my beautiful broken daughter Caitlin. We have fought so hard to help her battle her demons, but the depression and the bottle have taken hold again. Last night she tried to escape her pain in the most tragic way possible on I-90. We are just grateful God spared her life, even if she is currently refusing our help and isolating herself. Mental illness is a silent killer, but we will not give up on her. Please pray for her clarity and peace. The comment section was a cavalcade of well-meaning ignorance. Neighbors I had known since childhood were writing things like, "Stay strong," "Brenda, addiction is so hard on the family," and "I always suspected she was struggling. She seemed so distant lately." "She's gaslighting the entire town," I said, my voice rising. "She's framing the crash as a suicide attempt. She's painting me as an unstable alcoholic." "It's tactical," Kevin said, his voice grim. "Think about it, Kate. If you go to the police now and accuse them of cutting your brake lines, who does the public believe, the grieving, saintly mother dealing with a troubled addict, or the paranoid daughter who just crashed her car?" The vibration of my phone against the table became a continuous buzz. Texts were flooding in from aunts, cousins, and high school friends. None of them asked what happened. They all offered variations of the same patronizing script: "We love you, get help, don't push your mother away." I felt the walls closing in. Brenda had effectively immunized herself against the truth. She had stolen my credibility before I even had a chance to open my mouth. I wasn't just a victim of an accident anymore. I was a social pariah, a liability, a crazy woman shouting into the wind. If I didn't destroy this narrative immediately, it wouldn't matter what Detective Ford found in the GPS logs. No jury would convict a mother who had so publicly loved her broken child. I was cornered, stripped of my job, my reputation, and my family name, leaving me with nothing but the terrifying realization that I had to fight dirty to survive. The digital assassination of my character was effective, but it had one fatal flaw. It relied entirely on emotion, while Detective Ford dealt exclusively in hard facts. Sitting in Kevin's living room watching the comments pile up on Brenda's fraudulent Facebook post, a jagged shard of memory suddenly pierced through the fog of my concussion. I grabbed my phone, scrolling back through my text history with Carl, ignoring the wave of nausea that hit me at seeing his name. "Found it?" I said, shoving the phone toward Ford, who had been pacing the small apartment like a caged tiger. 3 days before the accident, Carl texted me, "Bringing your car to Mike's for a tune-up. Brake pad sounded squeaky when I borrowed it yesterday." My treat. He didn't take it to the dealership. He took it to a self-service shop on the south side. Ford grabbed his jacket immediately. If he took it to a legitimate mechanic, there would be a work order and a witness. If he took it to a you-wrench-it place, he was paying for privacy. "We need to move. Now." The drive to Mike's Auto Body was a blur of gray highway and industrial decay. The shop was located in a forgotten corner of the city, surrounded by chain-link fences topped with razor wire. The air smelled of burnt rubber and old grease. Inside the office was a cramped box of yellowing plexiglass and stacks of unpaid invoices. Mike, the owner, was a man who looked like he had been absorbing motor oil through his pores for 40 years. He didn't look happy to see a badge. "I don't keep records that long," Mike grunted, avoiding Ford's eyes as he wiped his hands on a filthy rag. "System overwrites every 7 days. Storage is expensive. You guys are wasting your time." "My accident happened exactly 7 days ago," I said, my voice trembling but loud. If the system overwrites at midnight, we have less than 3 hours. Mike shifted his weight, his eyes darting to the server tower humming under his desk. Look, lady, I don't want trouble. People come here to fix their own rides off the books. I don't watch what they do. Ford slammed his hand onto the counter, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the small room. He leaned in, his face inches from the mechanics. This isn't a parking ticket investigation, Mike. This is an attempted homicide investigation involving a twisted brake line. If that footage gets deleted while you're standing there, I will personally charge you with obstruction of justice accessory to attempted murder, and I will have the fire marshal tear this building apart brick by brick looking for code violations. Do you want to protect a customer, or do you want to keep your business? Mike paled. He muttered a curse, rounded the counter, and typed a password into the computer. Bay 4, Tuesday. I'm pulling it up. The monitor flickered to life. The timestamp read 2:15 p.m. 3 days prior to the crash. My sedan pulled into the frame, driven by Carl. But he wasn't alone. I gasped, covering my mouth with my hand. Brenda was in the passenger seat. On the screen, Carl got out, looking around nervously. He didn't pop the hood to check the oil. He didn't check the tires. Instead, he drove the car onto the lift and raised it. He walked to a tool bench in the corner, a bench that was out of view of the main floor but perfectly framed by this security camera, and picked up a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters. There, Ford said, pointing at the screen. Look at what he's targeting. Carl walked under the chassis. He didn't hesitate. He reached up near the rear wheel well and clamped the cutters down. It wasn't a clean cut. He twisted the tool, weakening the line so it would hold for a few miles, but fail under significant pressure, like the pressure of braking on a steep mountain pass. But the most chilling part wasn't Carl's hands. It was Brenda. She had stepped out of the car and was leaning against the garage door frame, smoking a cigarette. She wasn't looking at her husband. She was looking out at the parking lot, scanning for witnesses. She wasn't a passive observer. She was the lookout. She tapped ash onto the concrete, checked her watch, and said something to Carl that made him hurry. They did it together. I whispered, tears streaming down my face, hot and stinging. She didn't just sign the insurance papers. She stood guard while he rigged the car to kill me. Ford pulled a flash drive from his pocket and shoved it into the computer. Download it, all angles, now. He turned to me, his expression grim but satisfied. We have the weapon, the timeline, and the accomplices. They think you're cowering in fear, Caitlin. But with this drive, we just became the most dangerous people in their world. The adrenaline from securing the flash drive at the garage had barely subsided when the next move in Brenda's chess game arrived at Kevin's doorstep. It wasn't a threatening letter or a police summons. It was a courier holding a heavy cream-colored envelope embossed with gold leaf. The return address was the Hilton Chicago, one of the most expensive venues in the city. I opened it with trembling fingers, Ford and Kevin watching closely. Inside was an invitation printed on cardstock so thick it felt like a weapon. The Hall family invites you to a service of thanksgiving and hope, celebrating the miraculous survival of Caitlin Hall. Keynote address launching the Caitlin Hall Mental Health Recovery Fund. She's throwing a party, Kevin said, reading over my shoulder, his voice thick with disbelief. She tried to kill you 72 hours ago, and now she's throwing a gala in your honor. It's not a party, Sarah, my attorney, said from the speakerphone on the table. We had dialed her in immediately. It's a legal ambush. Read the fine print, Caitlin. Who are the guest speakers? I scanned the bottom of the invite. Dr. Eris Thorne, Chief of Psychiatry at Mercy Hospital, and Mr. Eldon Creek, Estate Planner. Dr. Thorne is known for signing involuntary psychiatric hold orders for high-net-worth families. Sarah explained, her tone sharp and urgent. And Creek specializes in adult conservatorships. They don't just want to celebrate you, Caitlin. They are setting a stage. They want you to show up ideally looking disheveled or angry. They will provoke you in front of witnesses. Get Dr. Thorne to certify that you are a danger to yourself and have Creek file for emergency temporary guardianship. If they succeed, they get control of your finances, your medical decisions, and yes, that insurance policy. They are trying to legally erase you since physically erasing you failed. My phone buzzed. It was Brenda. I put it on speaker. Caitlin, darling. Her voice oozed through the speaker, sweet as molasses and twice as sticky. I sent over an invitation. I know things have been strained, but your father and I want to make it right. We want to publicly show our support for your recovery. The whole family will be there. Please let us love you. I looked at Ford. He was cleaning his service weapon, his eyes hard as flint. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. I took a deep breath, pushing down the urge to scream. I'll be there, Mother. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Oh, thank God. Brenda sighed, the relief sounding almost genuine. Wear something nice, sweetheart. There will be press. We want everyone to see how much we care. She hung up. I stared at the phone, feeling a cold, crystalline clarity settle over me. They expected the broken, hysterical daughter they had slandered on Facebook. They expected a victim who would either hide in shame or scream like a maniac, playing right into their narrative of mental instability. You can't go in there alone, Kevin warned. It's a snake pit. I won't be alone, I said, looking at the flash drive sitting on the table, the drive containing the footage of Carl cutting my brake lines. I'm bringing the truth. I'll have a tactical team in the service corridor, Ford said, holstering his gun. But we need you to get them to admit it, or at least create a moment where the evidence hits hardest. You have to walk into that ballroom and play the part. Let them think they've won. Let them think they have you cornered. I went to the closet and pulled out the dress I had bought for a design award ceremony. I never got to attend a sharp, structured black gown that looked less like evening wear and more like armor. Brenda wanted a show. She wanted a public spectacle to solidify her control and wash her hands of her crime. I would give her a performance. I would walk into the lion's den, not as the prey, but as the hunter. Sarah, I said to the speakerphone, draft a revocation of power of attorney and bring it with you. Ford, get the warrant ready. Tonight, the Hall family legacy ends. The grand ballroom of the Hilton Chicago was a sea of false sympathy filled with cousins I hadn't seen in years, and business associates Brenda barely knew. They sipped champagne and murmured quietly, their eyes darting toward the podium where my mother stood bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight. She looked the picture of maternal grief, dressed in a modest navy gown, a tissue clutched in her manicured hand, her voice trembling just enough to break hearts. My daughter Caitlin, she said into the microphone, her voice echoing through the hushed room, has always been fragile. We tried to protect her from the darkness in her own mind, but sometimes love isn't enough. That night on the pass, it was a cry for help that nearly silenced our world forever. I stood at the back of the room, my hand resting on the heavy double doors. Beside me, Detective Ford checked his watch. Wait for the cue, he whispered. Let her commit to the lie. And so, Brenda continued, wiping a tear that sparkled perfectly under the lights. We are establishing this fund to ensure Caitlin gets the long-term psychiatric care she so desperately needs. Even if she hates us for it now, we will save her from herself. That was my cue. I pushed the doors open. They swung wide with a heavy thud that turned every head in the room. I didn't walk in looking broken. I walked in, wearing the black structured gown head high, my steps echoing on the marble floor. The room fell dead silent. Brenda froze mid-sentence, her eyes widening in genuine shock. That's a beautiful speech, Mother, I said, my voice projecting clearly without a microphone. I walked straight down the center aisle, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. But there's one small detail you forgot to mention to all these nice people. Caitlin, Brenda stammered, her composure cracking. Sweetheart, you're confused. Please sit down. Dr. Thorne is here to help you. I reached the stage but didn't climb it. I stood right below her, looking up. I'm not confused. I'm actually very curious. You told everyone I tried to kill myself because I was depressed. So I have a question. I turned to face the room, making eye contact with my aunt in the front row. If I was trying to commit suicide, why did you ask me, "Why are you still alive?" when I called you from the wreck? You didn't sound worried, Mom. You sounded disappointed. A gasp rippled through the room. She's lying. Brenda shrieked, her voice losing its polished veneer. She's off her medication. She's having an episode. And you, Carl. I pivoted to where my stepfather stood near the stage exit, looking like he wanted to vanish through the wall. You told the police you saw my car go over the edge and called 911 immediately because you were so terrified for my safety. Carl stepped forward, sweat glistening on his forehead. I did. I called the second I saw it. I tried to save you. Then explain this, I said, raising my voice. How did you call 911 at 10:15 p.m. to report a fatal crash when my car didn't actually hit the bottom of the ravine until 10:25 p.m.? The silence that followed was suffocating. Carl opened his mouth, but no sound came out. 10 minutes, Carl, I said, stepping closer. You reported me dead 10 minutes before the accident finished happening. You weren't witnessing a tragedy. You were following a script, but you were too fast. That's enough, Brenda yelled, dropping the microphone. It clattered loudly. Security, get her out of here. She's dangerous. I am dangerous, I agreed. But not to myself. I signaled to Ford at the back of the room. He plugged a laptop into the AV booth's main console. The giant projection screen behind Brenda, which had been displaying a slideshow of my childhood photos, suddenly flickered and changed. The grainy black and white footage from Mike's auto body filled the wall. It was massive, undeniable. Every person in the room watched in horror as Carl drove my car onto the lift. They watched him pick up the bolt cutters. They watched him reach under the chassis. And most damning of all, they watched Brenda standing guard at the door, smoking her cigarette, checking her watch. The same watch she was wearing right now. That's not... Brenda whispered, backing away from the screen as if it were a monster. That's fake. It's deepfake technology. She made it up. The audio from the 911 call began to play over the speakers, Carl's frantic fake voice booming over the video of his own sabotage. I think they're dead. Send an ambulance. The juxtaposition was brutal. The man on the screen was calmly cutting brake lines while the voice on the speakers was pretending to be a hero. Police. Ford's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. He strode down the aisle, badge high, flanked by 4 uniformed officers. Brenda Hall, Carl Hall, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder in the first-degree insurance fraud and tampering with evidence. The crowd erupted. My aunt screamed. Carl tried to run toward the kitchen exit, but 2 officers tackled him before he made it 3 steps. Brenda didn't run. She just stood there staring at me, her mask of the grieving mother dissolving into a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. As the officers cuffed her hands behind her back, hands that had held me as a child, hands that had signed my death warrant, she didn't beg for forgiveness. She hissed loud enough for only me to hear, "You ungrateful little brat. We did this for the family." "No, Brenda," I said, watching them drag her away. "You did it for the money, and now you have neither." The Cook County Courthouse smelled of old wood and finality. 6 months after the night at the Hilton, the heavy oak gavel slammed down, sealing the fate of the 2 people who had given me life only to try and steal it back. The trial had been swift. The evidence Ford secured from the garage, combined with the chilling 911 audio and the fraudulent insurance documents Sarah uncovered, left no room for reasonable doubt. The jury took less than 3 hours to return with a verdict. Brenda Hall, Judge Patterson said, looking over his spectacles with disdain. For the charge of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder coupled with multiple counts of insurance fraud, you are sentenced to 20 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. You will not be eligible for parole until you have served at least 85% of your sentence. Brenda slumped in her chair, the orange jumpsuit draining the last remnants of color from her face. Carl received 15 years for his role as the accomplice. They would be elderly, broken strangers by the time they saw the sky without razor wire cutting across it. As the bailiffs moved to shackle them for transport, Brenda lunged slightly toward the railing where I sat. Her eyes were wet, desperate. "Caitlin," she rasped, her voice cracking. "Please, you have to understand. I was drowning. I did everything. I did it for this family. To save our home." I stood up, smoothing the fabric of my coat. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel fear. I felt a profound, hollow peace. I walked to the railing, looking her directly in the eyes. "You didn't do it for the family, Brenda. You did it for yourself," I said, my voice steady. "I'm still your mother." She sobbed, reaching out a hand that couldn't reach me. "I raised you." "The daughter you raised died that night on the I-90 pass," I replied coldly. "She died the moment you asked if she was still alive and sounded disappointed. The woman standing in front of you now, I'm just the witness who put you away." I turned my back on her. I didn't look back when the heavy side doors swung shut, cutting off her wails. 2 weeks later, the settlement from the insurance company cleared a significant sum paid out to avoid a massive lawsuit for their negligence in issuing a policy without my consent. I used the money to pay off my medical bills and clear my student loans. The rest went into a down payment on a small, sun-drenched commercial loft in Seattle, 2,000 miles away from Chicago. I packed my life into a U-Haul. Kevin helped me load the last box. "You sure about this?" he asked, leaning against the truck. "It's a long drive." "I've never been more sure." I smiled, looking at the map. "I need mountains that don't remind me of crashing." I cut ties with everyone. The aunts who had called me crazy, the cousins who had liked Brenda's Facebook posts, the neighbors who had judged me. I blocked them all. I changed my number. I started my design studio, Phoenix Graphics. And for the first time in 26 years, I breathed air that wasn't tainted by obligation or fear. Family, I learned, isn't about whose blood runs in your veins. It's about who holds the rope when you're hanging off a cliff. My biological parents cut the line. But Kevin, who sat by my hospital bed, and Detective Ford, who fought for a stranger's justice, they were my family. And that was more than enough. This experience taught me a brutal but necessary lesson. Toxicity doesn't get a pass just because it shares your last name. We are conditioned to believe that we owe our parents our lives, our loyalty, and our forgiveness no matter what. But love is an action, not a birthright. If you are holding on to a relationship that hurts you, drains you, or endangers you simply because it's family, let this be your sign. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to save yourself. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to forgive, but to survive and thrive without them. I'm Caitlin. I survived the crash. But more importantly, I survived the truth. And if you're reading this, remember, you define your own worth, no matter what anyone else has written on your price tag. Stay safe, trust your gut, and thanks for watching.